channel. Today we are working on Programming Challenge 4 in Chapter 11 in the book Starting Out with Java. And this programming challenge is to create a GUI application that is called Travel Expenses. And we have to calculate travel expenses for a business person. And we have to ask these questions, how many days the person took the trip, and airfare, car rental, mileage, if the person uses his own car, parking fees, taxi fees, conference fees, lodging fees. We have to ask all these questions, and the person will be compensated according to this formula at $37 for every day on the trip. Parking fees, the person will be compensated or reimbursed by $10 per day. The taxi charges would be $20 per day. The lodging charges would be $95 a day. And if the person uses his own car, he will be reimbursed 27 cents per mile. So at the end of the application, after we got all the input, all the user input, we have to show or display the total expenses incurred by the user, by the business person, the total allowed expenses for the trip, the excess, if there is extra money left over, and if there is extra money that the person should pay back. If the business person was allowed to spend $1,000 and the business person spent, let's say, 1,500, we have to show the $500 extra that he went over the budget. And lastly, we have to show if there is any savings, if the person is spent less than allowed. We have to show that as well. So I already created the two classes. The first class is a trip panel, where I created a panel that would hold all the questions and the labels. And the next class would be the main class, which is called Travel Expenses, that will create the window and will create the two buttons, Exit and Calculate button, and would display the amount, all the information that we want. I will explain it, all the classes and all the lines of code. So let's run the program and see if we got the programming challenge correct. Here are all the titles, or all the titles for the text fields, and here are the text fields. I styled it a little bit better. So how many days did the person went on trip? Let's say 5 days. Airfare, let's say it was $1,400. Let's say car rental, it was 980. Miles driven, we would say, since the person rented a car, this would be $0. Parking fees, let's say it was $65 for the 5 days that he was on the trip. The taxi charges, let's say it was $40. Conference fees, let's say it was $450. Here is a lodging charges, let's say it was $2,600 for the 5 days. Let's click calculate. Here is the message. Total expense, we spent $3,640. The total allowed was $6,000 for the trip, and we didn't go over the allowed expenses, so it's $0. We saved $2,360 for the trip. If you add this amount to this amount, I think you would get $6,000. If you click exit, it will terminate the entire program. So let's go back to the classes and explain everything in the classes. So here, the first class, which is trip panel, I created this class. It would extend panel, right? Here, I made up a allowed expenses. I gave it 6,000, but you can give it whatever you want. According to the programming description, they didn't give us any particular number for the trip, so I made up 6,000, but it's not necessary to have 6,000 there. Here are the labels for the text fields: the day label, airfare label, and car rental label. And here are the other three labels. And here is another two labels. Here are three text fields, another text fields, and here is another text fields. Here I created a total expenses to increment the total expenses that the person spent. Here is the constructor, a trip panel, and we called this method called build panel. Here we created a private method. Here we set the layout of the panel to grid layout, which would have 8 rows and 8 columns for the labels and the text fields. Here is the background of the panel. I set it to red. You can set it whatever number you want. All you have to do is find a hex code for the color that you want and use color.decode and paste it here. It will change to any color any hex code color that you want. Here we add the labels and the text fields, all 8 of them, all 16 of them, I mean the labels and the text fields. Here I call the set style, which would set the style for the background of the panel and the background of text field as well. I set the background of the text field to red, but the text that the text field would have would be white. Otherwise, you can't see that well on the text field. But this is not necessary. You could leave it if you don't want to. Then we create a method called getDays that would return the days, how many days the person took the business trip. And we check if the day text field is empty. And if it's not empty, we set to whatever on the text field. And if it is empty, the days would contain 0. Here we created another method called getExpenses that would get the expenses. The first thing, we increment the text, the we increment the total expenses by multiplying how many days that the person is on trip times $37. And if you are wondering where I got the $37, is that if you go back to the description, the formula they said here, for every day the person would be allowed to spend $37 for meals. So I added that to the total expenses. Then I checked the airfare and I added to the total expenses. If the airfare is not empty, we add it to the total expenses. Here is the lodging. We added to the total expenses, and in the formula they said for every day we are allowed to spend $95. So I multiplied how many days we have to times 95 and added it to the total expense. Here is the conference. I added to the conference. Here, taxi charges. They said we are allowed to have $20 for every day. So we multiply by how many days we have and add it to the total expenses. Parking fees, we are allowed to spend $10. So we added that 10 times how many days we have to the total expenses. And here is miles driven. We check if the user entered anything in the miles driven text field. And if so, we check if the miles is greater or equal to 0. That means if the person didn't drive. No, I should have said greater than 0. If the miles is greater than 0, that means the person drove his private car. In that case, we have to multiply the miles that he put on his car times 27 cents according to the formula, and then add it to the total expenses. Otherwise, if the person didn't drove his car, we add total expenses to 0. Then here we say if the person had car rental, then we add whatever number that it costs to the total expenses, and then we return the total expenses here. Here is get total expense. We'll get the total expense here. And here, this method will return the allowed expense. Here, get excess. This method will return to us how much money he went over the budget. So we say if the total expenses is greater than the allowed expense, then we subtract the allowed expense from the total expense and we set that to the excess variable, and we will return the excess amount here if there's any. Otherwise, we will return 0. Here is the opposite of that, get saved amount. This means if the person didn't, his expenses were lower than allowed expenses, and if that is the case, then we subtract the allowed expenses from the total expenses and set to the amount here. and we return the amount. Otherwise, we return 0. So that is it for this class, trip panel. So we have to go to the next class, which is travel expenses. It inherits from the J frame so that we can create a window. And here we create a J panel called main panel. And here is the class that we worked on, that we saw, a trip panel, which is a panel. Then another panel called a button panel to hold the buttons. Here are 2 buttons, calculate button and exit button. Here is the constructor for this class, travel expenses. Here is the title, travel expenses. Here is the call for the build panel method. And here is the color. We set the background of the window color. So you have to be careful to not forget get content pane. This, because J-frame, the background, when you are setting the background of the J-frame, you can't just say set background and set the color. You have to call get content pane first, then called set background. I set it to red. I think it was red or dark red. But it's completely unnecessary. It's just a stylus thing. And here we add the main panel to the window, and we set the main panel to sit the north side of the window of the frame. And here's the size. We set to 400 wide and 400 high. Here is set close operations, and here is set visible to true. Here, build panel method. We set the layout of main panel to a border layout, and we set the border of main panel to have 20 pixels for all sides, 20 pixels space from all sides. And here is the background of the main panel to, I think it's red or lighter red. I don't remember this hex code. Here is the button panel, which have the layout. We set the layout of the button panel, which would have a grid layout. The grid layout would be 1 row and 2 columns, because we want to have 2 different buttons, the exit and the calculate button. Then we add the 2 buttons to the button panel, and we add a border to the button panel, and we add the trip panel to the main panel, and we set the trip panel to the center of the screen, and we add the button panel to the main panel, and we set that to the south side of the main panel. Here we set the background of button panel to this hex code color, and we set the action listeners for both buttons to these classes, exit button listener and calc button listener. In the calc button listener, we implement action listener, and here I created a decimal format class to format the money with the proper commas and periods. And here is the J option pane, show message dialog, which would show the message. And here I added a title, here expenses, and I called here information message. J option pane that show information message. After that, I created another class called exit button listener. It will implement action listener, and all it does is just terminates the entire program by calling system.exit 0. And here, lastly, we create the main method, and we call the class trip expenses. So that would be all the code that I wrote for these two classes. If you guys want me to go over one more time, or just write all the code from scratch, let me know. I will do it. Thank you for watching for this video. If you find this video helpful, please give this video a like. And if you want to see similar videos like this one, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.